It's not that deep. Everything love, lust, and life.
Sex. We talk about it so you can get better at it. We can all get better at it and maybe feel a bit happier in the process. It's not that deep. Or is it?
Hi and welcome to another episode of Sex It's Not That Deep. My name is Andy and I'm here today with my wife Fran and our very good friend Rebecca. Today we are talking sexual aftercare. Rebecca, what is sexual aftercare?
So, sexual aftercare was originally coined by the kink community as basically like a way of caring for your partners after sex has happened. Generally, it's after sex. It's now like expanded through sort of social media platforms into general sex, and I think probably that's a good thing. That's probably the healthy side of it. At its most basic, aftercare is sort of post-play check-in between sort of sex. Basically, it can improve sex for anybody, whether that's kinky or not. And I just think there's loads of benefits from the research I've done, and I'm interested to hear if you guys have any kind of post-sex ritual after you guys have had sex.
Well, when we first talked about this, we thought, well, maybe we don't. Well, you specifically were saying that you don't, but I think we do. I mean, we do sort of come back together. We tend not to be like cuddlers or anything. But this came originally from BDSM, didn't it? Where it was like, where you've had a particularly hard session and it might be quite sort of aggressive and derogatory and things like that sort of thing. And then you come back and be like, are you definitely okay? Are you fine? Sort of thing. We don't really do that because we don't tend to have particularly heavy sessions like that often, do we?
No, I mean, I think my first naive thought when you mentioned doing an episode on aftercare was I had images of subtly throwing toilet roll at somebody to help them out after, which obviously isn't what it is. It is about that psychological side, and yeah, you're right. When we first said it, I thought, no, we don't really do anything, but we do actually, and I've thought about this the last couple of times about sex, that we do actually have a little routine that we do, and
yeah. And
whilst we don't lay and cuddle for 25 minutes in a post-orgasmic haze, but we do have a little routine that we do, and I suppose we do kind of just check in on each other. Probably not to the level of detail that we'll learn about today, but we do have a little cues that we sort of take from each other.
Yeah, well, so we go to the bathroom and do clean up, I suppose, together, and then we sort of kiss and talk and sort of touch together as part of that process, so that it's not, I go and do this, you go and do that, and it's a sort of hidden thing. It's a kind of together thing. We've created the mess, we might as well sort the mess out together, sort of thing. But it's also, it is kind of a finishing sort of thing for us.
Yeah, I like that. I think that sounds like a really good like ritual you've got set up. I think people can
sort
be
of closing it down.
Yeah,
yeah.
I think particularly maybe we are sort of taught that, like, especially if you're having sort of one night stands and sex without strings and things like that, it's like, well, we can't be intimate after sex. That's, that's far too serious. I don't even think it's about that. I think it's about like having mutual respect for each other after exploring each other's bodies with such intimacy, rather than just being like, oh, we've had sex, I'm just going to sit on my phone, or, I'm just going to go downstairs and make my dinner. Do you know what I mean?
Like it took a build up to get into it, so you should take a bit of a tail off to get out of it, I think.
Yeah.
That's kind of where when we do sort of draw a line under it with the process, don't we?
Yeah, I know what you mean. It is kind of, if you're doing a workout, you have a warm up and you should have a warm down, shouldn't you? It's the best way to process physically, but as we've talked about so many times, sex is just as much a mental thing as it is a physical thing. So why wouldn't you take even a short amount of time just to sort of close that element of it down? And you're right, draw a line under it, and then you get on with whatever the next task in the day is. What about you, Rebecca? Before you sort of did a lot of research on this, is this something that you did naturally?
So it's something that has always been like quite important to me. Like I've definitely felt with particularly like one night stands and things like that, where in the past where I've sort of felt like I really needed some sense of aftercare. I felt like that's always been something that I felt like I've needed. I've needed some kind of checking in and like reassurance, I guess. Like maybe that's my own insecurities. But just from a physical point of view, it's like I have just got naked in front of you and like completely given myself to you. I would love to know that that was okay and that we're still on, you know, safe grounds. And as I've been like my partner now, we actually, after I did this research, we had like a really deep discussion about it, about sort of maybe what I needed a bit more. And like we definitely sort of stay in the same room, and it's not like a go on the phone or anything like that. But I needed a bit more. So we'll go into it in a bit more detail, I think. But in the what we'd learned, we now have little simple steps. But it for me, it was always just, oh, we'll just cuddle, and that was it, and that was enough because I just needed that body contact. That's enough for me now, and I'll explain more on why that's important in terms of what the elements of touch can give people from a hormone point of view. But yeah, it's definitely something that's become more important as time has gone on for me in, I think, developing the intimacy that, because sometimes sex definitely for me can be quite passionate and fast and perhaps not as intimate as it is, and having that aftercare afterwards just sort of like reaffirms that it's all from a place of love, you know.
Yeah, I think that's what it is for us, isn't it? We sort of come back together regardless of the kind of sex that we've had, so that it's that sort of underscores the experience, I think, for us.
Yeah.
So for you then, you know, if you think back, you know, over time, if it's more, you talked there about if it's sort of fast and passionate sex, you definitely feel that need for it. If it's maybe more sensual and slower, do you still feel you need the same level of aftercare, or have you kind of had that affirmation during sex?
Yeah, it's a good question. I probably feel like I've had it during, when it's like sensual and slow. I think, yeah. And I like, one of my favorite sexual experiences was with a type of guy I'd never ever go for, like the really nice guy, back when I was a rebel and just was not into that. And he was so like, I'll never ever forget it because I've never been nurtured so much in a sexual experience as I was. I was like properly like held, and it was slow and it was consensual. Like there was no element of, I never felt insecure throughout it. And I just came out of that experience like, wow, like it's still in my memories as one of the best sexual experiences of my life, because like the intimate element was there and the loving element was there, even though it was a one night stand, you know. And I just think there's so much depth you can get to it. It can become far more than just a physical experience. It didn't have to mean anything afterwards. We never went on to have a relationship or see each other again. But the point was that he really knew how to treat me well. And I love that.
Nice guys finished last though.
We could explore a little bit about the science behind it, if you like, because there is so much to say on this. So aftercare gives everybody involved a chance to return to their reality outside of the scene or sexual interaction. You can process what happened during the experience, including what you liked, what you didn't like, what you would change, and any other thoughts that came up during the scene. It's quite common in phone sex, weirdly enough. Hypno kink, which is a hypnotism kink, which I've actually looked into a little bit recently, not for my own, just because I was just really interested. I was like, what? How does this work? BDSM, and even after more vanilla type sex. I don't know how you would do it after phone sex. I assume you text, probably. Be like, how was that?
Or maybe move from that sort of scene into a conversation about what you've just done. You know, sort of, that's finished. How did we feel about it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not very good at phone sex all round, so I don't think it's something that I'd be able to do.
Phone sex is one that's quite, it can be so different and varied. I think everybody has different experiences with it, and it's like been quite intense for me when I've done phone sex, and I don't really know what the right way to do it is. So maybe there's a podcast in that somewhere.
It's acting though, and I just can't act, so
that's my problem.
I think the thing as well with our sort of domestic situation and the way that, you know, the way our jobs work and that, we're usually around each other anyway, so we've never really had that need to do that sort of more distant, sort of long distance phone sex type thing, because we're usually in each other's pockets anyway all day, aren't we? not in a literal sense.
So, aftercare prevents the drop after sexual activity. Intense sexual activity can lead to a natural high because of the way sex often leads to increased endorphins or adrenaline in the bloodstream. So, ending a scene or sexual experience too quickly can make that high disappear too quickly as well. This leads to an emotional state known as drop. Though commonly referred to as subdrop, people of all roles or dynamics can experience drop, whether immediately or several days afterwards. By working to prevent drop, aftercare not only improves our sex, but our mental health as well. And it's interesting because that effect of the adrenaline drop then in sex can be replicated in any area of your life that you've got an adrenaline high. So, for example, like the post-holiday blues, when you've gone on holiday, it's like the build up to it, there's loads of adrenaline, you're packing your bags, like, there's so many things to think about. Then you go on holiday, you're having a great time, there's a high, and then you come back and that everything just drops. And if it happens too quickly, you get I'm very familiar with the post-holiday blues. I don't know about you guys, but it's exactly the same thing.
I don't know, our last holiday we had so many twists and turns with cancelled flights and emergency landings. It all ended up as a little bit of a prolonged episode anyway, but I definitely know what you mean. I felt that when we came back. But in October, I felt really bloody miserable for a few days because I just resented the fact that I wasn't still.
I think also it's part of jet lag and part of like just coming back to reality in life is I totally get this because I get this a lot. This is part of what we do when we go out, when we do anything with the swinging scene. Is that sort of digest afterwards, talking about it afterwards, helps to close the experience off, and helps to I think to sort of sort out your feelings, so that rather than just feeling, you're sort of intelligently feeling. You're knowing what you're feeling, and you're sort of processing it rather than just letting it happen. You're sort of processing it and taking control of it a bit.
Yeah.
I think it helps to stop it being sort of out of control. Sorry.
I was going to say, I can imagine that the swinging experience is definitely one where you've got that adrenaline high, that build up to it, the sort of driving there, getting dressed up, etc., and then it's all over. I can really imagine that has that drop experience. Plus, you've got the sex, which again brings those hormones up, and then they drop down.
I think it's important now, like, to adjust back to real life because whether you're just having sex for 2 to 20 minutes or you're going out for the full night with the intention of going to a sex club, something like that, or you're on holiday, you're sort of detaching yourself from reality and the niggles of the world and your job and responsibilities, aren't you? So you've got to do something to sort of prepare yourself to go back into reality and face into those things that are not as exciting.
In fact, I totally get this from university. I used to go out in London overnight, and I'd come out of the club at like 7 o'clock in the morning, and everyone's going to work, and like the world has moved on without you, and it's a real jolt, and you feel really sort of out of place. And so I think that's probably that kind of feeling in a really neat, encapsulated way. When you have that jolt and you're like, oh, the world isn't where I thought it was. Same thing with holiday. You come back and you're like, oh, the country's different. Something's happened whilst you've been away or something. Or like so-and-so at work has done something. I think this is that kind of feeling.
Sex is escapism in many ways, isn't it? So we had actually talked about this before, about post-coital dysphoria. So this is after sex, like feeling very depressed, basically, which is due to the rapid hormone decline after orgasm, both in men and women. So it's 46% in women, 41% in men. It's way more common than I think we would ever think of it to be, where people have an orgasm and feel really depressed afterwards, just because that it's been such a high hormonally and then just suddenly gone. It's massively common, and I think I've said to you before, I've experienced partners who have this, who are going through this, and it's very easy to take it personally and be like, oh my gosh, what have I done? We've just had this amazing climactic experience and now they're unhappy. What's that about? And I think for the partners involved, the men who felt this that I've been with, it can be so overwhelming for them because they're confused. They don't understand why they're feeling that way. and then there's just this like real confusion after sex. But it's so, apparently the stats are saying it's a very, very common occurrence for people.
And as the thought, if it's not dealt with particularly well, then it can lead to regret, when actually maybe there wasn't even regret there, and the whole process was something that was wanted. But at the end of it, if it's that drops so great, you think, well, actually, maybe I wish I hadn't done that.
And I wonder if, because I know that a lot of men who masturbate can feel like this sense of guilt afterwards, or like feeling down. I just hear about it a lot. And I wonder if it has to do with the fact that there isn't a woman there or a partner there that is there to continue that experience and make that decline in hormones be less dramatic, you know?
Yeah.
Just a theory.
It's not a together thing, it's a single thing. Yeah.
What do you think about that, Andy?
I personally, it's not something I've really experienced. I say that actually. I think back to when I was single and wasn't, sex wasn't on tap at that point. I could kind of get that, that you go from that euphoria moment to that reality of, yep, that's as good as it is at the minute. Whereas now I wouldn't get that now, because I know that I've got you, Fran, we're in a relationship, we've got a good sex life. So, masturbation is just another part of that sex life for me personally. So I don't feel like myself, but I can definitely understand, especially if you're in a situation where you're not in a relationship at the moment and you're not having much sex, that you could end up feeling that way after, definitely. Because again, it's that return to reality, isn't it?
But it could also be if you're in a relationship but you're not getting the sex that you want, or you're not getting enough sex, and then you've got that sudden bump to, oh, there is, you've gone from feeling good to actually this is a problem, and it's not been addressed, and it will be addressed in that moment, because you'll be like, well, I wish I'd been doing that with my wife, or I wish my partner, or I wish that it was different. Maybe you're having sex that you don't particularly want, for whatever reason, and actually that come down is probably making that worse and making you think about those things more, those things that you're probably burying and sort of moving away from, because they're not nice things to think about in a relationship.
Yeah.
And maybe you don't have an answer to deal with them. And that actually maybe spending that time with that person, reaffirming your relationship with them, and potentially going over that sort of thing, but in a non-heightened way. Because generally post-sex, you're not exactly feeling angsty. But saying, this was great, but I'd like to try, could we try something like this next time or something? Maybe that's a good time to be discussing those things if there's a problem like that and you're having that come down because you're not happy with something.
Yeah.
But in a loving way, a loving feeling sort of glow sort of way, rather than going in beforehand, and being quite, you don't do this. You're being like, well, I loved that, but I'd love to try this. How do you feel? Sort of thing.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for bonding through hormones. I think there's a huge amount to be said by that. Interestingly, is a difference between men and women here, and obviously we only have these stats and this experience. We can't talk outside of that gender section there. Several chemicals and neurotransmitters are released following an orgasm, but men have a particular cocktail of chemicals that may result in immediate drowsiness. Women are more apt to want to continue a sensual experience, to bask in the glory of oxytocin. Men, on the other hand, are much more likely to want to get up, get something to eat, smoke a cigarette, ingest a drink, or do something else that keeps the surges of dopamine rolling now that the body is no longer producing as much in its post-orgasmic state. Another dopamine one is going on your phone, which is why that's probably been quite a common one, is I've just had sex, where's that hormone gone? Quick, go on my phone, get the dopamine back. What do you guys think about that?
We don't do that, do we?
We're like the flipped opposite, I think, because I think we book all of the whole science that you're saying there, because after sex, you just want to go to sleep.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel quite energised and want to go and get some stuff done. It's weird.
Yeah, I feel very relaxed. I like to bask in that hormone, in that kind of send me to sleep thing.
Yeah.
That's why I was saying that might be a good time to discuss things like that. That's why when we do our sort of deconstruction of nights, when we go out and things, I find that does really help sort of sort out if we've not had a great time or if we've decided on something we don't want to do or something. I think that really it's a really non-judgmental place to sort of analyse those things and bring in new things without the problem of hormones, being like getting turned on and stuff. It's quite nice to do it without that kind of distraction.
The time you spend post-sex can increase intimacy and bonding, as well as commitment, sexual and relationship satisfaction, according to the stats here. So there's a list of different ways to practice aftercare, which really ranges, and it doesn't have to be like a big deal, I don't think. So one of the ways is literally helping each other clean up, which is exactly what you guys do, whether that be toys, sheets, or each other. Talking about the experience. You can debrief on things you liked or didn't like, anything you'd like to change, and any notes you have for your partners. One thing I'd say about that is that I don't know maybe it's the case, and I don't know if it would be beneficial to say it straight afterwards. I don't know. I'm not sure. I know you guys feel, Fran, that it would be a good time to.
I think it has to come from a place of love.
If you'd had a bad experience, maybe wouldn't be the time. If you'd had a good experience, then maybe you'd be like, I really like that. I'd love to do this more or this extra next time. If it'd been really shit and you hadn't enjoyed yourself at all, then and they don't realise that, then maybe like bring it up later on. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it's like I said, it's got to come from a place of love, and it's got to be a kind of soft thing rather than you didn't do that. It's a definite softness there, I think, and an encouragement as well. But I do think it's good to do it in the moment, because then you've got that sort of feeling as part of the experience, and that's kind of part of what you take away from the experience. Just not just the feelings, but the sort of analysis of the feelings and the let's make it even better next time sort of thing, that sort of excitement for next time. I think that might help to combat the drop a bit.
Yeah.
Our common way of doing it is that if we've tried even something subtly different to what we've done before, a slightly different position or a different angle or a speed or just something completely out there and totally different, I'll always sort of ask you afterwards, what do you think of that? Was that good? Was that bad?
Yeah.
Just, but I agree. If something's like been a really bad experience, you should both be able to have picked up on that literally in the moment anyway. If somebody wasn't into something, and hopefully you've changed and done something else, and maybe that doesn't even need to be said.
And I think also if you have one of those really sensual experiences, I think just let it sort of ride as well.
Yeah.
Because they are.
It's like what you were saying. I guess it's positive association, isn't it, of that experience, and then like, oh, it was that good that time, I want to do it again. And like, I get what you mean about like, that's definitely something that I do. I'm very, very vocal with praise, so I'd be like, oh, I loved the way you did that to me, I love the way you did that, blah 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 blah. Whereas he's like so overwhelmed with being tired or having these feelings that he just can't focus or do anything. I'm just like full of that oxytocin, like I feel like a different person, I've got so much to say, I'm like, wow, this is amazing. So I get that, I really get that. Eating some snacks is seen as an aftercare activity as well. I think if anything's done together, it counts, basically. I think if you went off on your own, it would be different. Something that has been a bit of a running theme with me is ice cream after sex. Don't know why, don't know where that came from. Just like weird food cravings after sex, and for ages it was ice cream.
No, don't have that at all. Just water. Just want to cool down. Usually,
I suppose it depends. That partly probably depends on the time of day. We probably 3/4 of the time our sex is late at night, isn't it, before bed? But I could definitely see that being the case if it was during the day.
I can see working up an appetite. It just isn't me.
But no, I've never had any post-sex cravings. I don't remember. Maybe I will now.
So when I was a teenager, or not a teenager, well, yeah, towards the end of teenage time, sort of end of school, my boyfriend at the time, every time I had sex, I had a real urge to go and play computer games, and like really violent ones. I don't know why. It was like, I've got to go and kill something now.
Wow, that's so interesting.
And it became like a real, really for quite a long time. And it was only really with him. Never did it with anyone else. And yeah, every single time I was like, right, let's go kill stuff, sort of thing. It was, and it's not like something I played a lot in general. I didn't play a huge amount of games, but it was just, yeah, I just had a really sort of violent urge after sex with him. Don't know why. And then it was
Well,
something we'd do together as well.
I'm glad to hear that's no longer the case.
That's just like a really unique form of aftercare. It's not on my list, Fran, but I think it should be on my list.
I mean, we've got a PlayStation, we can go and do it, but it's never been something that's ever been across my radar since. It's really weird. It was just at that period of my life.
It's like my period with ice cream. Like, Andy, that wasn't during the day. This was at 3 a.m, this ice cream phase. It was just like, for weeks I was going through this. Honestly, and like when we didn't have any ice cream in, it'd be right, we need to go and get ice cream now. Just I had this absolute fixation. It was so weird. Oh yeah.
Well, let's try that, friend. The next time we have sex, we'll have a Call of Duty and ice cream marathon after.
Yeah, let's try that.
So another aftercare activity is to reflect on your own thoughts. Write in a journal or track your moods and activities on an app of some kind. I feel like that defies the point of being together, but maybe if you did it in a joint journal or a joint app, then maybe that would be beneficial. Soothing your senses, light a candle, burn incense, put on perfume, so anything that smells, taste, texture, touch, anything like that. Listen to some calming music, so that's sound, touch something soft, ground yourself, taking a shower together. So obviously, like a lot of the key around touch, and this goes on to cuddling, which is the next point as well, is oxytocin release, which is the hug hormone, which is the intimacy hormone, which is then bringing people together and connecting them, particularly after sex. So cuddling, snuggling with your partner, wrapping yourself up in a favourite blanket, giving each other massages, holding hands or spooning. All parts that are going to release oxytocin after sex, which just like cements in then like that intimacy and connection.
I get that. I like touching you afterwards, even if it's not sexual or even a hug. It's just touch. I like the feel of being in bed, that kind of warmth, envelopment sort of thing. Yeah. Which I suppose is kind of a hug, isn't it? But it just, I like my space as well. I think it goes back to like escapism a little bit. Definitely, like I'm very fond of those moments after sex where you're just cuddling and you can feel the sheets on you and everything, and like you don't think about anything else. It's just like there in that moment, right there and now, and it's. Yeah. I think that's a really special moment. I think that's maybe why I'm so fond of it, is because it does feel really nice, feels really calm,
So what does the science say then in terms of, if you have sex with your long-term partner, we've talked about it loads here, that you feel the need to be close and to close that sort of process off. What if though it's a one-night stand? What if it's you're some sort of sex club event or something? You're having sex with someone else that's not your partner. Is it the same strength of emotion or usually? So
the oxytocin release is the same for women regardless, which is why there is sort of a little bit of sort of stuff on the internet at the moment about, one night stands and casual sex aren't good for you, because it is fact that you do release oxytocin after orgasm, and oxytocin is the bonding hormone, so it makes it more difficult for women to detach from an emotional connection from their sexual partner. That is just fact. I don't think it's the same for men. Men aren't wired quite the same way. If you look at it biologically, they're not wired for connection in that same sense, but it definitely is for women. So it's an interesting concept. I don't think it should stop anybody from having casual sex, unless it's really significantly impacting them. But what do you think about that?
I wonder if that's linked to the drop then, you're saying, you're looking biologically for a connection that's not there, and then your body's like, oh no, where's it gone? It's kind of like losing something. It's kind of like, you know, like with children, isn't it? When they're not there, sometimes you get that kind of pang, I suppose. And I think maybe it's something like that. You were saying about getting that drop if you don't have that experience afterwards. Like maybe that makes it worse. But then you were saying the people, obviously, because we have heterosex, the people that you've experienced it with have been men. So I don't know. I don't know statistically whether it's more likely for women to experience this or for men. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think women always release oxytocin after orgasm. So, but then again, we're assuming that they're orgasming, which, as we know, is
not
that's
always.
That's a whole different stat in itself, isn't it? So I do think it depends, and like whether, you know, you've had alcohol or anything that's going to influence your state of consciousness or influence your ability to orgasm, or it's like the one night stands I've had in the past, and you know, it wasn't just a few. I've never really had that problem, except with one person, and 5 years later that person ended up being my partner, which is hopefully forever. Very cute. But that was, I think, more than, we knew each other in a different sense to that, so it was always going to be more than just sex. Whereas when it has just been sex, or you just have a level of understanding with somebody where it doesn't have to be any more than that, then I don't know, it's not really been a problem for me, or not a problem that I'm aware of. You know, maybe it's something subconsciously that is like, oh, you know, striving for partnership. I don't know. Who knows?
I think from my experience, it is a different feeling if you're in a relationship with someone, especially if we focus on sex afterwards. It is a different feeling if you're in a relationship versus it's a one-night stand, or you're at a sex club or something and you're going to have sex with somebody, but you know that you're not going home with them after. You know you're not going to meet up for a coffee the next day. It is a different feeling for me. So that the feeling I have after we've had sex is different to if I've had sex with somebody else. It's a totally different feeling.
Also, you were saying about women releasing oxytocin. I was just thinking, well, whether two women together, that makes it more intense. But I mean, the things that I've done with other women hasn't been like that because I've not got an emotional connection to them. But I get what you mean about that feeling, that sort of being dazed after orgasming. That, like, what do I do with this feeling sort of thing?
Yeah.
I do get that, actually, when we do at clubs.
I think from what we've described then, that obviously the hormone release is scientific. You can't stop that, you can't influence it. But I do think from what we're discussing, it probably is heightened by your feelings to that person.
Yeah.
Probably does multiply it somewhat.
Yeah.
Being gentle with each other is the key, isn't it?
Well, it's the key for if you want intimate sex. If you're wanting rough sex, then it would be the opposite.
Even afterwards, I think there needs to be some kind of gentleness at some point in the relationship there. Yeah. Otherwise, the whole thing becomes a bit of a drop. Even if
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, you go. I was just going to say, even if it's really, really heightened excitement, you know, that kind of real intenseness, I still think there needs to be a gentleness just to bring it back to reality, because reality isn't that angst. Reality is that you're in a relationship, that there is a love.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as well, like, the difference now that I'm so much more aware of my body and what I need and stuff like that, it'd be very different for me having casual sex now than it was back then.
Yeah.
In that I'd probably feel that need for connection afterwards and be like, oh, why can't I do this? You know? So I don't know, maybe it changes as you sort of have more experiences. Another way of doing aftercare is chill and then Netflix. So visual stimulation that you do together, but it has to be something light. Although, according to Fran, action and killing people in video games is also an option. So
I think it was a brain off kind of thing, because you don't really think when you're playing games. I think it actually takes stimulation down. There's excitement, but there's no stimulation mentally, really, because you're not thinking about day-to-day stuff, and you are still suspended in that fantasy world. It's just now it's a completely different online fantasy world.
Yeah.
So I think I probably
like-
was just extending the dopamine, but just by not going back to reality.
It's like continuing that
Yeah.
escapism experience. Yeah, I totally get that. That makes perfect sense. Because like, who wouldn't want to when it feels that good? Who wouldn't want to keep it going?
Yeah.
So when we indulge in sex, chemicals like oxytocin, as we said, dopamine, and prolactin is another one as well, are all released. Prolactin is released from nipple stimulation. Aftercare helps to regulate your body after a steamy sash. It can also diminish any post-sexual shame, making you feel more emotionally whole afterwards, which is, I think we touched on that a little bit, post-sexual shame. Is that something you guys are familiar with at all?
Not from personal experience particularly. Occasionally, I suppose. But yeah, it's something I've seen in other people as well. And I think it's something more related to anxiety. And again, when you're on your hormonal journey, I think that drop back into anxiety and life hitting you again is probably quite disorienting. And I think that could reassert as shame.
How does the menstrual cycle affect it? Because, it's fair to say, from a woman within that cycle, hormones are all over the place, aren't they? Whereas for men, it's generally a lot more of a steady line. Does that have much bearing on it?
Probably.
I think it definitely does. When you're in your follicular phase, when you're ovulating, for people with sort of regular cycles anyway, it's definitely, your body is more inclined to want sex more, want it sort of fast from anybody, basically. It's probably, I think, you're generally more energized and less focused and fixated on it being perfect and intimate and sensual. Whereas when you are past ovulation, your luteal phase towards menstruation, and through those sort of that 10 days or so, you are going to be wanting nurturing and sensuality and oxytocin and sort of more emotional support, because of the way the hormones are wired. That's all that boost up towards ovulation, that get a penis in you now hormonal sort of drive just goes whoop and just drops back down, which and that drive then for sex would naturally sort of diminish slightly. Most people don't notice it. It's very, very subtle. For people who track their cycles, I think it's more noticeable. I really notice it, because I'm obsessed with everything to do with the womb. So it's I definitely notice it. But it's fascinating that the way the body works. So yeah, I definitely think that it could impact that. It's just for some people it wouldn't be as obvious as it is for others.
It wouldn't be for me. I don't have cycles. So, but I probably do have the hormones. The hormonal cycle just the same, I'd have thought. I just don't have the physical cycle. So maybe I do feel those things, but don't connect it to anything.
I think it depends if you're ovulating or not, because if you're on birth control, that limits ovulation and stimulates, most birth control stimulates pregnancy. That's why you don't have periods, because it thinks you're pregnant. Then the hormones would be at a very different level to what they would be if they were sort of desiring like the ovulation and et cetera, et cetera. So I think it really depends what kind of birth control people are on, but it definitely has an effect, 100%.
I'm pretty certain anxiety has an effect on this as a thing, because I mean, a lot of people's anxieties, there's a lot of anxieties around sex itself, but I think maybe the care afterwards as well, I think, can have a really positive effect on anxiety.
Yeah, and if you feel in a relationship.
Yeah, if you're feeling nurtured at the end of it, then I think you're taking that feeling forwards, and hopefully giving yourself a bit of a where your baseline might be down here, you're giving yourself a bit of a baseline here to sort of work off for a while before you come back to reality. I think it could be a good aftercare and a good routine could be really good for anxious people.
Yeah.
So do we think aftercares in the wider population then is sort of underutilised, and people maybe don't take as much care with it as they should?
100%. I think I didn't know anything about the science behind it. I hadn't even thought about it before looking at this research, which is why I was so desperate to do this podcast. I thought we need to tell everybody, we need to tell the world how beneficial it can be. So yeah, I think it doesn't have to be anything major. So one thing I learned is that if for men who, I don't know, I'm sure it can be any gender, but I know that this stat was for men, if when they've got that feeling of I need to go and get dopamine, the advice is if touching is too much, if cuddling is too much, the advice is to just have eye contact with your partner, and that simple tool basically of looking at each other can give enough stimulation to sort that intense feeling out and that intense sort of post-coital experience out. It's just eye contact. It's so interesting. Just didn't even think about that.
No, you don't, do you? I can see that being important. It's important to us, I think.
I think from a wider perspective as well, this sort of highlights to me how, whilst, not every relationship has an active or a thriving sex life for so many different reasons, but if you're fortunate enough to be in a relationship that has a strong sex life, then I can definitely see now. This sort of reinforces the fact that it seems almost an obvious statement to say that a good sex life contributes to a good, healthy relationship in general. But when you think of the science and everything that's happening hormonally after you've had sex together, it makes absolute sense that would then foster a more positive relationship generally, because you're having that moment where physically you're being close to each other and then hormonally you're close to each other. Yeah. You're just reinforcing the positive feelings of it, aren't you?
Absolutely.
It's a part of sex, and we don't think of it as being a part of sex. There's stages to it. There's foreplay, there's sex, and then there is this part afterwards that we just don't think of as being a part of sex. And I think certainly we didn't think of it as being a thing, but it's an important thing, isn't it? I mean, foreplay is important, sex is important, so is this bit.
But we've talked about this so many times on different podcast topics, which is that, largely porn has taught us that sex finishes with the orgasm, and that with the male orgasm, and that's it. And then it's done. And obviously it's not. There's so much more in that process, yeah.
I think recognising it as a thing and treating it as a thing means that you then may do better things within that section. I mean, like I said, we do aftercare without thinking of it as aftercare. But I think now going away, we are, and thinking of it as a section of time for us to do things, I think we would look at what we actually want out of that experience at the end of it, and tailor how we act to that. And I think that's probably something that people probably miss out a lot because they don't think of it as a thing.
Yeah, and I think, as Andy really beautifully put it, it is effectively the cool down of sex. You do the warm up, you do the foreplay, and then you need the cool down. And I think it is so right and necessary that we include that as part of sex itself.
If you don't do a cool down with the gym, you end up with stiff muscles and hurting yourself. And if you don't do a cool down with this, you end up with a relationship that could be not quite as perfect as it could be. Or an experience that might not be as tip top as it could be.
I think we've had
it's really
really good discussion on this, and hopefully we've opened some eyes about aftercare. I think this has been really informative. So yeah, thank you guys for listening to our podcast today, and please check us out on our socials and at www.coupled.com, and we hope to see you again on another episode of Sex. It's not that deep.
Sex. It's not that deep.